The wind was a blade, carving the world into bone-white splinters. Elias felt it in his teeth, a familiar ache that mirrored the one in his soul. It was a day for the dead or the dying. He leaned into the gale, his worn coat a poor shield against the mountain's fury. The snow wasn't falling anymore. It was a horizontal assault, a blizzard that had come on with the speed of a striking snake. His trap lines, usually a simple task of survival, had become a pilgrimage through a hostile, white hell. He was checking the last one, nestled in a grove of skeletal aspens, when he saw it. Not the clean, dark fur of a rabbit or the gray shadow of a fox, but a heap of sodden rags that had no place in the landscape. He moved closer, his rifle held low, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. It wasn't one shape, but three, huddled together in the lee of a granite boulder. A desperate, failing stand against the cold. A woman, her face a mask of blue-white exhaustion, held two smaller bundles tight against her chest. Her eyes were closed, her black hair plastered to her skull with ice. The larger of the two children, a girl of maybe 10, had her arms wrapped around an even smaller child, a toddler, cocooning her from the worst of the wind. They were ghosts already halfway to the other side. Elias didn't hesitate. The man who had sought isolation, who had chosen this frozen purgatory as his penance, acted on an instinct older than grief. He slung his rifle over his back, scooped the woman into his arms. She weighed nothing, a thing of bird bones and desperation, and bellowed over the wind at the older girl. "Get up! You have to get up!" The girl's eyes fluttered open, wide with a terror that went deeper than the cold. She scrambled to her feet, pulling the little one with her, a tiny, silent doll in a threadbare coat. "Follow me. Don't stop," Elias commanded, his voice a raw tear in the fabric of the storm. He turned toward the faint promise of his cabin, a smudge of smoke he could barely see, and began the long walk back, carrying the weight of strangers and the heavier burden of a past he could never outrun. The cabin was a haven of heat and the scent of pine smoke. He laid the woman on the worn rug before the hearth, her breath a shallow, rattling thing. The girls huddled together near the door, watching him with the eyes of cornered animals. The older one, Alara, held her little sister, Clara, so tightly she seemed to be trying to merge their bodies into one. Elias ignored them for a moment, his focus on the woman. He worked with a grim efficiency, cutting away the frozen layers of her dress, chafing her icy hands and feet, forcing sips of lukewarm broth between her cracked lips. He saw the bruises then, ugly purple blossoms on her arms and a fading yellow stain on her cheekbone. This was not the work of the mountain. This was the work of a man. Slowly, a flicker of life returned to her. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, opened and fixed on him. There was no gratitude in them, only a raw, primal fear. Her name was Lena, though he would not learn that for days. For now she was just the storm brought inside. He left a bowl of broth and a tin cup of water on the floor beside her, then turned his attention to the children. He approached slowly, his hands open and empty. "You're safe here," he said, his voice softer than he'd used in years. "The storm can't get you." Alara stared at him, her small face a perfect portrait of defiance. Clara remained hidden, a scrap of shadow behind her sister. He placed 2 more bowls near them and retreated to his side of the small room, giving them the illusion of space. For 3 days the blizzard raged, imprisoning them together. The world outside was a howling whiteness, a void. Inside, a fragile, unspoken truce formed. Elias moved with a quiet purpose, stoking the fire, melting snow for water, leaving food for his silent guests. He slept in his chair, his rifle beside him, a sentinel guarding against a threat he couldn't name. Lena watched his every move. She saw the way his hands, though rough and calloused, were gentle when he added a log to the fire. She saw the deep weariness in his eyes, a familiar landscape of pain. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply existed, a quiet, solid presence against the chaos of the storm and the turmoil in her own heart. He had his own rituals of grief. Each morning, He would stand at the single window, looking out toward two small mounds of stone on the edge of the clearing. He would hold a small, silver locket in his hand, his thumb stroking its surface until the metal was warm. He never opened it. He didn't have to. The memory was burned onto the back of his eyes. On the fourth day, the wind died. A profound silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The world outside was reborn, blanketed in a pristine, blinding white. Lena was stronger. She sat up, pulling the threadbare blanket around her shoulders. She watched as Elias took a small, broken thing from the floor near the children. A wooden bird. Its wings snapped. Clara had dropped it during their frantic entry. Elias sat at his small table and, with a shard of glass and a strip of leather, began to mend it. His large hands worked with a surgeon's precision. He carved a new feather into the wood, smoothed the edges, and bound the wing with the care of a priest tending a relic. He didn't look at the children as he worked, yet his every action was for them. When he was done, he placed the mended bird on the floor, halfway between him and them, and went back to his chair. Hours passed in silence. Then a small movement. It was Clara, the little one. She crawled on her hands and knees, a slow, hesitant journey across the floorboards. She picked up the wooden bird, her tiny fingers tracing the mended wing. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Elias. For the first time, her eyes, wide and dark, met his directly. She held the bird out to him, a silent offering, a sacrament. Elias felt something crack deep inside his chest, a glacier of grief calving into a thawing sea. He reached out and let his fingers brush hers as he took the bird. "Thank you," he whispered. The words felt foreign in his mouth. Later that day, Lena spoke for the first time, her voice raspy from disuse. "Why?" He was sharpening an axe, the rhythmic scrape of stone on steel filling the cabin. He stopped, looking at her. Her gaze was directed toward the window, toward the two stone mounds. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. He set the axe down. "My wife, Sarah, and my little girl, Rose," he said their names, and the ghosts in the room seemed to lean closer. "A fever in the spring. There was nothing I could do. I buried them myself." He looked at his hands, as if he could still feel the weight of the shovel. "I thought this place, this quiet, was what I deserved." Lena just nodded, a shared understanding of loss passing between them. The dam of silence had been breached. The next day, Alara, emboldened by her sister's courage and her mother figure's conversation, approached him as he sat cleaning his rifle. "Are you a good man?" she asked, her voice clear and direct. Elias paused, the oiled rag still in his hand. He looked at the girl, at her earnest, unblinking stare. He thought of the men he had killed in the war, of the family he had failed to save. "I'm trying to be," he answered, and it was the most honest thing he had ever said. The fragile peace was shattered a week later. The snow had begun to melt, revealing the wounded earth beneath. Elias was splitting logs when he saw Lena staring out at the valley, her body rigid with a new, sharper fear. "He'll come," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He'll have a tracker. He never lets go of what he thinks is his." That night, by the low light of the fire, she told him. Her name was Lena, and the girls were her sisters. Their parents had been sharecroppers, indebted to a man named Silas Blackwood, a man who owned the valley and everything in it. When their parents died, Silas had claimed the children as part of the debt. "He called us his wards," she said, her voice laced with venom. "But we were slaves." She spoke of the cruelty, the casual violence, the hunger. She told him how Silas's gaze had started to linger on Alara, and how he had made a deal with a childless couple from the next county. A deal for Clara. Lena had overheard him boasting. "She's a healthy one," Silas had said. "Strong stock. They won't even miss her." Alara had been listening at the door. She had burst into the room, screaming, throwing herself in front of her little sister. "Don't take her. She's only 3. The memory of the scream was a fresh wound in the quiet cabin. "That night," Lena continued, her eyes fixed on the flames, "I knew we had to run. I took what little we had and we fled into the mountains, into the storm. I thought it was better to die out there, free, than to live in his cage. Elias listened, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The soldier he had tried to bury was stirring, awake and alert. He saw the war not on a distant battlefield, but here, in the eyes of this woman and her sisters. He saw the enemy, not in a uniform, but in the shape of a man named Silas. He looked at Clara, now asleep by the fire, her small hand clutching the mended bird. He looked at Alara, whose fierce loyalty had sparked their desperate flight. He looked at Lena, whose resilience was a quiet fire. He finally looked at the two graves on the hill. He had failed to protect his family from the indifferent cruelty of fate. He would not fail this one. "He won't find you," Elias said, the words a vow. "This mountain doesn't give up its own." But the mountain was no longer their only protector. 2 days later, a rider appeared. A single dark speck against the vast white expanse of the valley floor, moving with a relentless purpose. Silas. Elias watched him through a small spyglass, his knuckles white. He was not alone. 2 other riders fanned out behind him. "Lena," he said, his voice calm, devoid of all emotion. "Take the girls. Go to the root cellar. Stay there until I come for you." He pushed his spare rifle into her hands. It was heavier than she expected. "Do you know how to use it?" Her eyes met his. The fear was still there, but beneath it was a core of hard-won steel. She nodded once, her jaw tight. She herded her sisters toward the heavy wooden door in the floorboards. "Don't be scared," she whispered to them, her voice a shield. "He is a good man." Elias barricaded the main door and took his position at the window, the same window where he mourned his dead. Now it was a firing post. He watched them approach, Silas in the lead, a man who rode his horse like he owned the very ground beneath it. They stopped just outside rifle range. "Elias Thorne." Silas's voice was rich and arrogant, accustomed to obedience. "I know you're in there. I have no quarrel with you, soldier. I'm here for my property. Send out the woman and the brats, and I'll be on my way." Elias remained silent, his breathing slow and even. He was no longer Elias Thorne, the grieving husband. He was Sergeant Thorne, the man who had held a ridge against impossible odds. "I know they're with you," Silas shouted, his patience thinning. "I paid a tracker good money. Don't make me burn you out, old man." Elias raised his rifle, the stock settling into the familiar groove of his shoulder. He aimed not at Silas, but at the man to his right. He exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle shot across the clearing, and the man tumbled from his saddle, a puppet with its strings cut. The second rider, startled, spurred his horse toward the cover of the trees, firing wildly at the cabin. Silas, his face contorted in a mask of fury, dismounted and took cover behind his horse. "You damn fool! You just signed your own death warrant!" he screamed. The firefight began in earnest. Bullets chewed at the logs of the cabin. Elias was methodical, patient. He fired sparingly, making each shot count. He knew the terrain, knew every rock and tree. The second hired man tried to circle around toward the back of the cabin. Elias let him go. He heard a scuffle near the rear wall, then a single, sharp report. Not from his rifle. He risked a glance. The man lay dead on the ground near the woodpile. In the dark opening of the root cellar, Lena stood, the rifle smoking in her hands. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady. She had reclaimed her life with a single violent act. She nodded at him, a soldier to her sergeant, and disappeared back into the darkness. Now it was just Silas. Enraged and desperate, Silas pulled a torch from his saddlebag, a torch he had brought for this very purpose. He lit it and hurled it toward the small barn where Elias kept his hay and tools. The dry structure went up in a whoosh of orange flame, thick black smoke billowing into the clean mountain air. It was a distraction. Under the cover of the smoke, Silas charged the cabin. Elias met him at the door. The fight was not one of bullets, but of brutal, close-quarters rage. Silas was strong, fueled by entitlement and fury. But Elias was fueled by something more potent: redemption. They crashed through the cabin, overturning the table, scattering the embers from the hearth. Silas swung a burning log from the fire, and Elias deflected it with his rifle butt. The soldier's training was an old, cold song in his blood. He moved with a deadly economy, blocking, striking, disarming. He broke Silas's arm with a sharp twist, and the man screamed, a sound of pure agony. Elias stood over him, his rifle aimed at Silas's head, his finger on the trigger. He saw the terror in the man's eyes, the same terror he had seen in Lena's. He saw the faces of the men he had killed in the war. He saw the faces of Sarah and Rose, pleading with him. He lowered the rifle. Killing this man would be an execution, not a defense. It would feed the part of himself he had come here to starve. He grabbed a coil of rope from the wall. "The law can have what's left of you," he grunted, tying the whimpering man's hands and feet. The fight was over. The barn burned itself out, a smoldering pyre for the past. Elias stepped out of the cabin, his body a symphony of aches. Lena and the girls emerged from the cellar, blinking in the harsh light. They stood together, the four of them, watching the smoke curl into the sky. No one spoke. There were no words for what had passed between them. In the days that followed, a new rhythm established itself. Elias rode down to the nearest town with Silas tied to his horse, a grim delivery for the town marshal. He returned with supplies and a new sense of purpose. He began to repair the cabin, replacing the bullet-scarred logs. Lena tended to the home, her movements no longer furtive and scared, but confident. She cooked meals that were more than just sustenance. She mended their clothes. She brought a warmth to the small cabin that had nothing to do with the fire. The children began to heal. Alara's fierce, protective shell softened. She would follow Elias as he worked, asking questions about the trees, the animals, the stars. And one afternoon, as Elias was mending a section of fence near the woods, a sound drifted through the air, clear and bright as a spring robin. Laughter. It was Clara. She was chasing a butterfly, her small face alight with a joy that Elias thought had been extinguished from the world forever. The sound hit him with the force of a physical blow, and he had to lean against the fence post, his eyes suddenly burning. That evening, Alara approached him as he sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the peaks. "Are we staying?" she asked, the question hanging in the quiet air. Elias looked at the cabin, now filled with the low murmur of Lena humming a forgotten lullaby. He looked at the two small graves on the hill, no longer symbols of his failure, but silent witnesses to his second chance. He looked back at the small, serious girl standing before him. "This is home," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "If you'll have it." Lena came to the doorway then, wiping her hands on an apron. She had heard. Her eyes met his across the small porch, and for the first time he saw her smile. It was not a large smile, but it was real, and it transformed her face, chasing away the last of the shadows. She nodded, a simple gesture that sealed their future. The four of them stood there as twilight painted the snow-capped mountains in hues of purple and rose. A new family, forged in the crucible of a blizzard, bound by trauma, and saved by hope. Inside the cabin, the fire in the hearth glowed, a steady, beating heart in the vast, unforgiving, and beautiful wilderness.